All right, troops. Chris, my friend, a pleasure to have you on. How are you getting on, man?
I'm doing very well, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you very much for coming on, my friend. Something that I found out just before we came on here is that you actually watched the show. So I've got to ask, why?
Because, it's very funny to me. I feel really happy to be part of your last sort of run of this show. And I'm actually very sad to see that this show is coming to an end because it felt like a really positive thing. And there's an awful lot of these sort of shows on the internet, and so many of them accentuate the negative. And I like to think I'm a fairly optimistic person, and I like anything that is helping. Anything that's helpful, anything that's trying to be optimistic, anything that is aimed at helping, particularly helping people who might be having a hard time. And I think a lot of people are having a hard time. So to be able to have a show that allows you to just have a conversation. I think conversation is the most important aspect of all of this. So it's really nice to be able to sit back and relax and listen to you talk to some really interesting people. I mean, some of the shows have been really fantastic. You had on Jon Stewart, who I thought was fantastic. And the one that I thought was really good was Karen Gibb, who I thought was just really interesting woman.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, again, it's the case of it's the final season, but the caveat is the final season is when the guests eventually dry up. When they stop saying they want to come on, that's when I'll stop. And that was why I thought, because I've reached out a few times to see if people wanted to come on, but there was nothing back. And I mean, at that point, I was 170 odd episodes deep into the show. And it was a case of, if sitcoms last that long, I mean, you'll know yourself with the profession you do. If it lasts that long, you get old, you yell at it.
Yes, absolutely. It was, they say, jump the shark.
Yeah, and I didn't want to be like
stupid.
That. Yeah, I didn't want to jump the shark or get an old yelled. I thought, well, if I'm going to go out, I'll go out in my terms. And it's a case of when I got the responses for people coming on, I was blown away. I was like, man, that's a lot of people that want to come on this. So, I'm very humbled and I'm very grateful that people are wanting to come on. And I always say never, because every time I've said no, it's definitely done, I end up eating my own words. And I've learned slightly, like 2% since then.
2% is better than no percent, I suppose. So it's
exactly, my friend. So it's a case of I'll keep going until the guests stop wanting to come on. And that is the case of it's the final season because I'll just keep going until it stops. And then who knows? May have plans.
It'll be like Bob Dylan's never-ending tour. You're going to be going for like the next 40 years now.
Well, we got to see it. You say final, and then all of a sudden everybody jumps on it.
Yeah,
like they say. But enough about me and my madness. We're here to talk about you and your origin story, because the one thing we all have in common is our origins. So, Chris, for my followers, please tell us your origin story.
My origin story. Well, I mean, I was born in 1980 in a small-ish fishing town called Peterhead. It's on the northeast coast of Scotland, just north of Aberdeen. Which is actually not particularly known for harvesting much in the way of filmmaking talent or anything like that. Although, interestingly, we've got John S. Baird, who's a very good film director. He directed Tetris recently, so he came from Peterhead. And Peter Mullen, who's probably more famously known as a Glaswegian, but he was born in Peterhead. So we've got Peter Mullen as well to our name. But, it was a fairly standard sort of upbringing. Myself, two brothers. I'm part of I had that Spielberg thing of divorced parents, so I always focused a lot of my attention on anything that allowed me to escape from reality, I suppose. And films were always the thing that kind of I latched onto, that I attached myself to. In fact, my earliest memory that I actually have, because everybody always says, "Oh, I did hypnotherapy and stuff, and I regressed," and I had my earliest memory, and I could see myself in the cot looking at my mother and stuff like that. The earliest memory I have is I must have been 2 years old in 1982 going to see E.T. in the Playhouse Cinema in Peterhead, which is when it was released. Not a re-release, mind you. I'm that old. I'm old enough to remember when it first came out. And I remember being taken to the cinema for the first time to see E.T. What a great first movie experience to have in a theater was that movie. And I remember even at that age, the impression it made on me, it kind of just embedded it into my mind. And it is interesting now to look back. I'm 43 now, so to look back 41 years and see that is the first memory I have, and then to see me now and I'm working in the industry.
Yeah.
It must have been something. There's something kind of nice and serendipitous, I think, about that. So, I grew up in a small town, not much in the way of filmmaking facilities or anything like that. I was very kindly given a camcorder, a Hi8 camcorder, when I was about 14 or 15 by my uncle, who said, you just put that to good use. And myself and a couple of friends from school, we were just constantly shooting short films and feature films and just all this incredibly stupid stuff, as you always do when you're a teenager. It's school fees, though. You're learning as you go along. And I kid you not, I think I learned more about filmmaking just from playing about in those areas than whenever I eventually went to film school in 1998. And I went to film school in Newcastle, by the way. So I didn't stay in Scotland for that, although Newcastle's practically Scotland, isn't it?
Pretty much. It's got the same traits, hasn't it?
It's a very, very kind people. I always found. I've always felt very at home there.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful place to go to university as well. I went to Northumbria University there, and they had a really good film program, because at the time that I went to film school, Aberdeen unfortunately didn't really have much in the way of a film program. I think they had a little 1-year media theory course you could do through the college, but they didn't have a production program or anything like that. So you had to go further afield, and it was either Glasgow or Newcastle. And I chose Newcastle simply because the facilities were really good at that point. And they also had a really wonderful arts program involved at that university that I really, really enjoyed. And, did university for 3 years. At the end of it, like a lot of people who do media and filmmaking and all that sort of stuff, I thought to myself, right, now I'll go off and work for the BBC, or I'll go and I'll make my first feature film. And it's all plain sailing and it's yachts and,
What, DiCaprio Wolf of Wall Street style?
Yeah, Hollywood, exact fun coupons. Yeah, Hollywood. And then 20 years of nothing. 20 years of jobs as a bookstore manager, jobs as a hotel manager. In fact, I was, up until 4 years ago, I was still working as a night manager in a hotel. And it's taken 20 years from film school to now to actually have a career, to have, films that have been produced. I can go into HMV and one of my films is on the shelf. I'm having conversations with directors and producers about getting things commissioned or developing TV series ideas, things like that. And but it all comes from that day in 1982 when I was taken to see E.T. in the cinema. And interestingly enough, that cinema that I saw E.T. in, I think 16 years later, I became the projectionist of that cinema for a year. And that was the year before I went to film school. And that was, even with the job that I have today, that was bar none the best job I've ever had in my life. That year where I was projectionist at the Playhouse Cinema, fantastic. I was the right age. I knew what I wanted to do, and I was working in a cinema. It doesn't get better than that. So
it's something to do with that kind of thing of what the creatives going to work in a cinema. Like one of my friends, Chris Thorburn, was quite successful in the stand-up circuit. When he went to uni up in Ayr, he wound up working as a projectionist in the Odeon cinema up there as well.
Yes, I know that cinema as well. Yeah.
Yes, I love that cinema. It's just the architecture of it is such a lovely building. It's such a grand building, and Odeon's always bring back memories for me when I was a teenager, going to out with my friends to watch films every weekend. Most of the time I was shot down because I was like, I don't want to see Harry Potter, and they're like, well, we do, and I'm like, oh, great. I'm the only non-Harry Potter fan that has seen every fucking Harry Potter film, because I always got shot down.
That already shows me the generation gap between you and me, Andrew, because you say Harry Potter when you were a kid, and I think, I'm old enough that I remember going to see Back to the Future too and stuff like those sort of all the great 80s Spielberg era films and stuff.
Well, in fairness, you're 43, I'm 36, so there's not.
That's not too bad.
It's not too bad, in fairness, and obviously those type of films are films that I watch as well. You've always got to know the histories. For me, that doesn't feel like, people would say in young languages, the classics. And I'm like, to me, classics are your Alfred Hitchcock films, or
Mhm.
films with Humphrey Bogart, Cary Grant,
That's
and
right.
all those are the ones that I think they're classics, for me.
Yes.
So don't worry, my friend. I've been an old head since I was 4. My body's just starting to catch up with me finally.
You're an old soul. Yeah, I've always
Yes.
felt the same. And you're absolutely right. That's a very sort of that's a 21st century thing, it seems, at the moment. And I'm quite active on things like Twitter or X, as it's called now. It'll always be Twitter to me.
Yes.
But you see the different generation gaps between film fans and the people that call something like The Matrix a classic. And I was like, that was barely 20 years ago. But
Yeah.
and you feel like you should step forward and say, no, there's a whole 100 years of cinema before we hit The Matrix.
Yes.
But I don't get involved in those sort of
Yes.
conversations because
It's like when you go to them, have you seen the original Frankenstein? There you go. That's how far you need to go back, my friends. But
Absolutely.
something that you mentioned there, where you were working as a night manager in a hotel. Now, obviously, I recently watched the Night Manager show with Tom Hiddleston. So I've got to ask, where's the fact and fiction on that one? Being a creative yourself, where did you go? No, that's bullshit.
The second he got Elizabeth Debicki pinned up against the wall is when I said no night manager has ever had that experience. There are certain elements to it that the element of admin is really about the only thing they got right. He's constantly sort of like sitting at that desk, but my hotel was not perched on a sort of snowy mountaintop, and it didn't have a helicopter pad where multi-billionaires could come in at any time they want. So it was not quite my experience, but night managing for me was great because it gave me time where other sort of day jobs don't give you the time to pursue your creative elements. Because once I'd finished any of my tasks that night, it was usually only about 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning. That left me with about 6 hours where I could be sitting writing, or I could be sitting thinking up concepts for other projects and stuff like that. And the screenplay that eventually gave me my very first screenplay option with a production company, I wrote during that time as a night manager. So, I don't like to waste hours just staring blankly at a computer screen or anything like that. I always try to be as productive as possible. But, I saw that show, and it's a very sexy show. It's fun, it's entertaining. Hugh Laurie's badass in it, but it was not my experience, sadly.
Yeah. Would you say it was less Night Manager and more The Shining?
There are elements of The Shining to it, definitely. Although I never felt, I had other friends of mine who worked the sort of night shift work, and they always said that it sort of unnerved them a little bit. I never got unnerved by it. The thing that unnerved me more was when residents would still be up and about at 3 or 4 in the morning. That's when I was like, you've got the hotel room, you've paid for the hotel room, surely you should be using the hotel room. Why are you up and about? You used to have to do fire walks every hour. So every hour you'd go around the hotel, the residence block, to see if everything was safe, fire exit doors were closed, all that sort of stuff. That was the only element of it that I didn't like. Walking down those long empty corridors, and you could hear inside the rooms as you're walking there. I find that a little bit unnerving. But other than that, it was actually a fairly decent gig, I must admit. Can't complain.
Yeah, it's the same. Like when I worked night shifts in a hospital.
That to me sounds like a lot more work.
There's work, but it's also very, very creepy, because you're used to when you go visiting hours, like there's a lot of kind of bustle, and there's like staff that are there, and patients are going to visit, come for appointments, and you've got relatives visiting patients, things like that. At that time, it's dead quiet, and all you hear is your own footsteps, and it's just like you're constantly looking behind you, like you're waiting for something to go on. It's like I really wish though that I worked as in nights at hospital. Like now that my dad have identical twin boys, because I could just put 2 wigs on them, and it would be like The Shining.
It would indeed.
Well, don't get me wrong, heart attacks would probably increase by like 70%, but I think it would be worth it. I think we've got a plan there. We've got something that could be done in there, like a comedy show of a night shift guy just like determined to get fired. Like, right, what can I do to screw with people?
I mean, I'm pretty sure that's one of the reasons that horror movies use hospitals quite a lot as locations. Because I suppose because there is a higher potential or probability that there are a few ghosts kicking about. There's definitely a few dead bodies there somewhere.
Oh
So,
yeah.
it does that. That would have just unnerved me. That's not a job I think I could do. But
Yeah,
you're obviously made of tougher stuff than I am.
I wouldn't say so. I did have a nervous breakdown after my 10 weeks, but we got there in the end. That's what I
Yeah,
like to say. And
that'll do it.
I did have to walk past the mortuary, like going to where I worked, and I was like every time, and I'm like, oh my god! It's like I know that there's people there, and I just don't want to think about that just yet. Anyway, so talk to me about like your first kind of big screenplay break. How did that come about?
I mean, that was interesting because I was still, as I say, I was still working in hotels at the time, and I had written this screenplay for a feature film that was called Follow Up. It was about a musician, and I'd put it into a film competition, a script competition through the British Independent Film Festival.
Yeah.
It was in the top 20. Didn't win, but one of the judges of that film festival was an independent British producer. Who's a man called Stuart Brennan, who's also a BAFTA-winning actor. He's a director in his own right. He's a writer. He does everything. He even makes the tea, I'm sure, and I'm sure he does a very good job of it too. But he got in contact with me after the festival had been over for a couple of days, and he said, "Look, I've been looking for a project like this, and I really liked it. I'd like to option it." And I was 40 at that point, and I'd never had anything optioned, never had anything really made, not really, outside of the kind of amateurish independent productions that I've been working on. So I said, absolutely, yep, let's do it. So he optioned it. And it was like a snowball effect. It all sort of came from there. I thought to myself, right, I can now say on my social medias, on my CV, that I'm an optioned screenwriter. That's a big leap from just being a screenwriter who has not had anything produced, because it means that somebody thinks your work is worth enough to pay a little bit of money to get the option on that script. And that script ultimately ended up not getting made, and the option reverted back to me. But while we were in the midst of developing that, Stuart said to me, "What else have you got?" And I said, "Well, this was during the first wave of the pandemic, so everything had closed down, and his productions had closed down. He was in the middle of shooting on another film, and so he said, what else have you got? Because producers could do nothing but read material at this point. And I said, well, I've got this little horror movie that I've been working on. And I wrote it specifically because I realized that the film productions were about to have to shift fundamentally because of COVID restrictions. So it was going to mean less crew, less cast, less locations. And I said, right, well, I've got this movie, and it's set in a freight elevator that is broken down, and it's 2 characters, 90 minutes in this contained environment. Wow. And he said, well, I want to read that. And so I gave him that script to read. And at the time, that script was called Freight. And he read that and immediately said, well, we're going to put this one that I've optioned to the side, and I'm going to option this one as well, because I think we can get this made this year. I was like, okay, sure, absolutely, let's do that. So he optioned that one. Follow-up got put to one side, and he stormed ahead. He got me attached to the project with a director called Steve Johnson, who he's Liverpool born, but he's been working and living in Glasgow for the last 20 odd years. And he's made a couple of feature films as well. He did a very good film called Convergence a couple of years ago.
Convergence. That's Nico Collard. I actually went to college with her.
I know. She's great. She's really great. She just Mercy Falls as well.
Yes, absolutely fantastic actress. And just what I've loved is that she's kept that personality that she always had back. Like, I mean, we were back 2007, 2008 when I first went to college with her. And I remember I went to the premiere at the Cineworld. I took my wife with me. And the second she saw me, and she's wearing like a lovely gold dress, like heels that could probably like kill a man. And she legs it up the stairs, runs and basically spear hugs me. And she's like, "Oh my god, it's so great to see you." She's like to my wife, he's supported me all through my career. He's brilliant. He's fantastic. And she's a bit like, "You realize he's my husband, right?" and I'm like, no, but it's just something like that is so grounded and so down to earth. And that is, ironically, that's a convergence between us all of how we all
absolutely
go. Well, you mentioned how you've seen like your own stuff in HMV, and I've got to ask, what is that like when you go in and you see your own stuff? Did your heart just like burst at your chest, like metaphorically, obviously?
I'm still not quite used to it. It's very strange though, because obviously when I wrote the screenplay, that's nearly 3 years ago at this point. So to see it at this point, I'm so far removed from the story at this point, but it is still strange to say, 3 years ago, that was just in my head, and then I put it down on paper, and here it is. It's on DVD. And that was an unusual experience for me. It is, and God love my Twitter followers, because every now and again somebody will post a photograph and say, "Hey, Chris, I was in HMV." So I've got this little collection of photographs that people have taken of the DVD in different places.
You've got to do that like a documentary kind of thing, and just have that at the end, like all the collage. To do a documentary of your filmmaking journey, a collage of all the people that have taken the pictures with your DVDs, like the little thank yous at the end. Like you can have that one for free. There you go.
But I mean, it's an experience that I like, because it's an experience that I can own quite nicely. Whereas when the film was done, it premiered at Fright Fest, which is the big horror film festival down in London. So we premiered in the Prince Charles Cinema in Leicester Square, which is an amazing place to do your world premiere. So we're down there, but that felt like it was about 48 hours I was in London, and I felt like I was in this kind of goldfish bowl, because I didn't get a chance to experience anything but what was plopped right in front of me. And director Steve and I were stuck in these bars at the top of hotels and plopped in a corner, and then they'd have every half an hour a different reviewer or critic would come in and interview us and ask us the same questions. It was this weird kind of press junket thing. So that was wild, and I honestly can't remember sitting watching the movie. I can't remember what that experience was like, and I can't really remember the after party either, which is not anything to do with the condition I was in, but just it was so overwhelming. So to be able to decompress now and to see it sitting there on a shelf and just saying, I did that, is great, because, a lot of people want to make these sort of movies. A lot of people want to work in the film industry, and it's incredibly difficult. It's notoriously hard to get anything made. So I feel like everybody always says, oh, talent plays a part, but luck plays a huge part in this. I think I just found the right place, right time.
Yeah.
I don't want to, the pandemic took a lot from everybody, but what it gave me was time. It gave me time to sit and just factor in screenwriting as my day job, essentially, at that point. Whereas when I was working in the hotels, it was the other way around. It was the hobby that I wanted to be a career. Now it's the career. So it's nice to have that distance from it, but it is still a very strange experience to have. I mean, this week alone, I actually posted something on my socials. Amazon Prime actually recommended my movie to me. It said, "Hey, you might."
I did see that actually,
and I was like, "Oh, yeah, I might like that." So
yeah, I did see that, because, like, as much as you say, obviously you've watched my show, and I am very, very grateful of that. I am a follower of yours as well, and have been for quite a while. And just like that, it's like, yes, I like the content, but I love the journey. I love where you've been, how you've got to where you are. And I also love, much like with Nico, that core of who you are has not changed in the slightest. You're such a lovely person. You're very humble. You're very gracious. And it's so heartwarming to see that. And I think it's where a lot of people, like, kind of from our neck of the woods, they don't get that credit. Whereas, like, you'll see some people and they'll be like, "Oh, yes, I am awesome. I know I'm awesome. You don't need to tell me I'm awesome." With Scottish people, we're very much, our feet are on the ground a lot, and we are grateful for every opportunity we get. Even like I said, with the people reaching out wanting to come on to, like, the final series of the show, I was like, wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea that people actually really liked the show, and so many people have reached out privately saying we're sad that it's going to be ending. And I'm like, you don't think about the impact that it makes on other people's lives. Have you found that since, like, your first features came out, that you've realized that you've touched people's lives in a way that maybe you couldn't have imagined?
I mean, not specifically with Stalker, although Stalker, because it's a genre piece, it has its fans and it has its critics and that sort of stuff, and I don't really pay much attention to that. One of the other films that I was lucky enough to be involved with, I wrote the screenplay for a short film called Bruise, and that was a script that dealt with domestic violence and sexual abuse, and we shot that in Ireland with the production company, and that has gone on to it's had screenings at international festivals all over the world. It's won a bunch of awards. We're very, very proud of how far that's gone, but that was a very rewarding experience for me, because I had people getting in touch with me after seeing that film, survivors and victims, and people who have managed to get away from really horrific circumstances. And we actually worked with, it was shot in County Mayo in Ireland, and we actually worked with the Mayo rape clinics and Safe Ireland. And the final scene in the movie, we brought in a whole bunch of these women, these incredible women who were survivors, who were allowed to contribute to the film in that way as well.
Yeah.
So it's felt very rewarding to me. That's what this is all about for me. I love being able to say that I do this for a living. I love that I'm working in the film industry, because I never, 15-year-old me never would have imagined that I would get to do that. I get to wake up every morning and sit down at my computer and start with a blank page and think, what do I want to see? What movie do I want to see? And hopefully we'll take it on a journey to getting made. But you said something very important. It's that idea of you have to keep yourself rooted. This industry is loaded with people who, and I'll steal one of my lines from Stalker. It's where the character says, that person walks with a swagger they haven't earned yet. And that idea of ego, and that idea of somebody that's, I know I'm awesome. Please only speak to me for 30 seconds and then let me go. I need to be awesome over there now. And you meet these people in the industry. And I'm generally a fairly polite person, and I can get on and have a conversation with anybody. I'm this guy from a working class town in Scotland, and I don't really belong to that world. But I think that's what gives me an advantage as an observer of things. And I think it gives me an advantage as a writer to be able to look at every facet of people and be able to write anything. I can write any genre, I can write any character without it seeming like I'm too distant from it. But kindness is a very, very big factor in my day-to-day working. I don't want to work with people who are dicks, frankly, and life's too short. I feel like Ricky Gervais has crafted this kind of persona that he keeps people well away from him, because he comes across as somebody who could be quite aggressive or quite confrontational. But if you look at his work, there's a very considerate, intelligent, rather sweet-natured guy underneath all of that. That is definitely. Just because he got famous in his 40s, he had nothing to lose. So he doesn't have to play the game of being, I'm awesome and I'm cool and all this. He can just do the work and then tell people to back off and leave him alone. And
and the work that he does as well is fantastic. Like, there's a guy, Ross Owen, that is from our neck of the woods in Airdrie, and he's quite friendly with Ricky Gervais. Like, he met him like basically essentially doing extra work. But Ricky's always remembered him, and he got him on to do work when he did Afterlife. He's been on as a guest on his own show as well, Ross Owen's show. And it just showed you, like, because I was always a bit like, I'm not sure about Ricky Gervais, just because of the public persona that they is presented, which is rightfully so. You've got your public and your private. And when he came on to that interview, in my opinion, 180'd completely. He was such a lovely, genuine, and humble man. I know sometimes you've got to put that persona up to protect yourself as well. But just seeing that little bit of vulnerability was fantastic. And I think that's kind of what's missing. At least from my own experience from the industry these days, is that so many people are obsessed with the facade that you don't get to see what's behind it. So, because you know yourself, social media, everything is just instant. It's like, you're right, you're wrong, you're black, you're white. There's no gray area. So when you see that facade drop, you're like, oh, I have to question every facet of my existence now.
Yeah, that's right. And social media does play a huge part in that as well. I think that it's a very dangerous thing, social media. I use it as a tool more than anything. I don't particularly think that I liked that. It's lovely that you would say something like that. You were very complimentary earlier, saying that I loved watching your journey. And I think that was important to me, was to try and give a reflection of that, because I know from being that 15-year-old that wanted to get into the business, I would have killed to have been able to follow somebody going from nothing into the industry. I know, I'm not Aaron Sorkin. I don't command millions of dollars per script or anything like that, but I am a working screenwriter. I'm in the industry and I'm working, developing things, and I'm in contact with filmmakers, and that it's a job as much as it is a passion. And I think it's important to show people that it can be both. You can play the game of the business and you can also be creative at the same time. And I think those people that use the facade, that are too up themselves, that are too careful to try and craft this persona, the work suffers because of it. And you see very talented people vanish into obscurity, because after a while that facade becomes boring to people. You're flavor of the month for a while, then the backlash starts, and before you know it, you're done. So it's a hard thing to balance, but and it's an interesting thing to talk about on a show like this, because I think that a lot of times mental health can play a big part in how that persona can fracture, and how that and how we can perceive a person. You know, there's that very famous idea of, you know, you never know what anybody's going through, but if you're going to plaster every single minute detail of your life onto social media, it's going to make it very hard to filter that in a way that can allow you to have empathy for somebody. If you're going to present yourself in a bad light, it's going to be incredibly difficult for anybody to sort of focus on the positives that are going on there.
Exactly. And since you did touch on the mental health aspect, that does bring me to the final question of the show. If you could give one piece of advice to anyone that is struggling with mental health issues at this point in time, what would that piece of advice be, and why?
I mean, I thought about this a lot because obviously, like I say, I watched the show, so I knew this question was coming. And one of the things that I'm often asked is, am I happy? And it's this idea of, are you happy? And I personally, I tend to be quite suspicious of anybody that says they're truly happy or anything like that, because I think happiness at times can be a dangerous thing, because I think that happiness is one of those things that we're constantly striving for. I don't think it's this one tangible thing. So I would say, I mean, my advice I would give to anybody is to aim for content, aim to be content, contentment. I am much more comfortable to tell people that I am content than I am to say I'm happy, because I don't know if anybody's ever really happy enough. Because like I say, happiness is an aspirational aspect. Contentment is wherever you are, that's the place to be. It's grounding in a way. And it sounds very sort of like meditation or something like that, which interestingly enough, I do every now and again. I'm not one of these people that chants with incense or anything like that, but I do the breathing exercises stuff. And I find that anything that can ground you is always a very good thing. And particularly for somebody who uses their brain and has to be creative the way that I do every day, it's nice to be centered. But contentment, I think, is the key a lot of times. And I think also conversation. And that's why I think a show like this is really valuable, because you're not afraid to be a little bit of vulnerability, to show vulnerability, which I think is a healthy thing sometimes. You said something really interesting on one of your earlier shows, which was I had it written down so I didn't forget what you said, because I thought it was great. You have to go through it to understand it, which I think you were referencing your father, I think, or something like that at that point. And but I thought that line was so perfectly valid, that idea of you have to go through something to understand it. That sort of dials me in to this idea of wherever you are in the world, just try to keep your feet as flat as possible, and just don't worry so much about where you are. Don't worry about where other people are as well. That's where the social media aspect of this, I think, becomes really, really dangerous. All we see is an aspirational life when we look at Instagram. Everybody's on holiday. Everyone's sitting on a yacht. Everybody's drinking a cocktail. Everybody's out in the sun. Everybody's having a great time. And that's just not the case. Everybody is crafting these sort of, it's the persona thing again. You're crafting a fictional dreamlike version of your reality. And your reality is, you get up the same way everybody else gets up. You go to work, you eat 3 meals a day if you're lucky. And, you know, if you're lucky, you've got a family you go home to. If you're unlucky, maybe you're lonely. And I think loneliness was something you touched on in an earlier episode I remember watching as well, this idea of loneliness. I consider myself very lucky as a creative-minded person to be able to take any frustrations I have, or any loneliness or any neurosis I have, and put it down on paper and try and figure things out that way. It's writing for me is a therapy, and I'm lucky I have that. And some people don't have that, and that's when I think conversation comes in really important. And that's where a show like this, I think, is really valuable.
Well, thank you, my friend. And I can also tell my mum that she shares the same vision as a creative and successful screenwriter, because what she has told me when I was struggling was, don't aim for happy, aim for content.
Yes.
And it's like, my mom is a very, very smart woman. And that was, but you know what it's like with your parents, you're just kind of like, whatever, mum. Well, but at that point, it really struck a chord with me. It was like, right. It was so profound. And hearing like someone like yourself as well saying it, it's like, wow, it's a valuable piece of advice, and something that a lot of people do need to strive for. And
yes, I agree. You know, life is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Exactly.
So and social media is showing us people sprinting. or the perception of sprinting. We do not need to be that far down the road just yet. Life is long. There's a great Chris Rock quote where he says, everybody says life is short. No, it isn't. Life is long, especially if you make the wrong decisions. And that's always stayed in my mind. I'm like, yeah, just slow down. The world's gone so fast now, and it needs to slow down. We need to all step outside. We need to feel the wind on our face, and we need to calm down a little bit. And I know that sounds like the cliche, calm down and carry on. But calming down, being calm is part of it. It's my everything, really.
Yeah, definitely, my friend. And for my followers, tell them where they can find you for your socials. Sell, baby, sell.
Yeah. Well, this is nice because the great thing about just having a conversation is I don't really have anything to sell at the moment, and I don't know when this show's coming out anyway. But you can find me on X/Twitter, Instagram at the Chris Watt. It's all lowercase, all one word. The Chris Watt makes me sound like an egotistical prick. It's just the only name that I could get. I tried just Chris Watt. They didn't have it, so I put the Chris Watt. So. They can't blame me for that. But follow me, I follow back. I also interact as much as I can. I like to accumulate, particularly creatives. If you're creative or have questions about the film industry and sort of how to get in there, or if you're a screenwriter or a musician or an artist of any kind, all are welcome, because I like to think I have a nice, safe, comfortable corner of social media. I don't play the mean-spirited game, and I'm not argumentative. So you can find me there.
And again, you've got a great presence about you as well, which would make people want to reach out. And for my followers, his links will be in the description of the video, and we'll have seen his socials pop up at the bottom as well. Chris, honestly, this has been such a pleasure and a real privilege for me to have you come on the show. Thank you so much for reaching out. I really, really appreciate it, and I'm very, very grateful. Thank you.
My pleasure, Andrew. Thanks for having me. This has been great. Thank you.
Thank you. And until next time, my faithful followers, I've been Andrew Durnan. This has been the brilliant Chris Watt. Please check out his stuff. Go HMV, pick up the DVD and send us some photos. I want to start that trend for him as well. And until next time, take care. Stay safe. Bye-bye.